Today's topic is can Sanatana Dharma truly be global? And the discussion can be later on about how we view Sanatana Dharma. And I'm going to do the presentation first and perhaps leave scope for question and answers or a discussion at the end of the presentation. So, is Sanatana Dharma defined as per geography or culture? What actually defines Sanatana Dharma? How do we make it truly global? And whose responsibility is it to make it global? So, these are the questions we're going to see as we go along. And what defines Sanatana Dharma? Um, we can say it's the cosmic truth of universally pervasive consciousness. Now, people obviously define it differently. We would like to use the word Atman. Some darshanas may just say it's consciousness, for instance. But the point is that we are the whole and we are part of it the same. The Purnamada Purnavidam shlokam that we refer to, that encapsulates this whole point of Sanatana Dharma. And all those living and non-living have the same consciousness or the Atman. Hence, we are all the same. So that's the Samadrishti concept, which we can actually see within Bhagavad Gita itself, where Stavara Jangamas, Stavara being the ones which are stationary and Jangama being mobile, all of them have the same Chaitanya or the Purusha in it. So therefore, it is not to be seen that animate are the only ones which have the Atmans, even the inanimate have the Atman in it. And that we are governed by the karmic law, and that we go through reincarnation cycle of several hundreds or even thousands of births. Bahunam janmanam ante jnanavan mam prapadyate, says Bhagavad Gita. So it's very clear that reincarnation is a fundamental concept within Sanatana Dharma. And this law pertains to not just the humans or animals or the trees, because we often relate to, as I earlier said, the pranas, as in the living beings, but actually to everything that is part of the creation. Everything, nothing gets missed. Whether it's the hills, the forests, the rivers, the oceans, stars, planets, gods, celestial beings, you name it. Everything is actually kind of um, um, part of this whole concept of Sanatana Dharma. So if that is the case, there is actually no scope for it to be limited to only a geographical territory or to a culture. Now, why is it an important question? I think fundamentally, somewhere down the line, we often associate Sanatana Dharma to India alone or to the idea of Hinduism alone. Are they both, mutually kind of the same as in Sanatana Dharma and Hinduism? That we can look at separately, but we need to really look at the idea of Sanatana Dharma as the cosmic or the universal spiritual concept. And it had been practiced by all humanity until advent of human-made religions. I think that's another point to be noted, that we have had advent of religions not so long ago. Perhaps we can just say 2000 years or so, and not really before that. And again, what defines Sanatana Dharma? The concepts of immortality, the ancestral worship, living with nature, respecting the local deities, whether it is the Grama Devatas or the Vana Devatas. These are all these you can still see in, for instance, the Aboriginal Australians. You can still see in the Native Americans, and perhaps various other kind of indigenous tribes and cultures across the world. But yeah, mainstream societies have generally kind of gone away from these practices, and as they are mainly practicing religions. And Sanatana Dharma was also about celebrating plurality and rejoicing in the love of oneness of universal consciousness. Now, if that's what it is, then India is the land where Sanatana Dharma is still practiced, and it is the land which preserves its continuity and keeps exploring to understand the cosmic truth. So nobody can kind of question this aspect as much as anybody wants to relate Sanatana Dharma. Automatically, we think of India as the land, to the extent that perhaps there is. My concern is that once somebody is out of India, it's almost like everybody looks at how do we kind of support the culture and the spiritual practice within India, but the idea of propagation or spreading the knowledge, leave alone propagation, but spreading the knowledge outside India, it is seen as if it's like it's not to be done, or perhaps not desirable. And I think there are certain barriers to be broken there, because ultimately it is universal knowledge and it applies to everyone. And Sanatana Dharma forms the basic framework for various streams of thoughts to emerge, as each individual's unique understanding is very different. So it's the basic framework, but at the end of the day, I give the analogy that, for instance, if you are a builder and you're actually building a lot of houses, and like in a colony, you basically are laying the same foundation for all the houses. The foundation is exactly the same. But when it comes to the structure on top of it, as a builder, you're going to ask the individual owner what their different vastu requirements are, or features within, and so on. So that's where things are going to be different, but the foundation is going to be the same. So that's exactly the point. Sanatana Dharma gives you the basic framework, but beyond that, it is your individual expression based on what your understanding is and how you wish to kind of explore it. So it therefore allows the flexibility to think and practice with plurality, with oneness as the goal, right? So the question now is Sanatana Dharma confined to a region? I'm sure it's very easy to kind of understand the history of how the history, let's call it history of spirituality and spirituality of religion as such. It wasn't really, you don't need to go beyond perhaps, as I said, 2 to 3,000 years back. Now, if you look at the Romans, or you look at the Greeks, or you look at the native Indian cultures of America, the Incas and Aztecs and so on. Or for that matter, even if you look at the traditions of the Japanese, there's one thing for sure, that ancestral worship has been universal. Now, just think about it a little bit. Ancestral worship, how does it come? Is it just respecting them because you were born to them? No, actually, they actually extend beyond to the understanding that the ancestors have moved on to a different plane, which we call as Pitraloka, for instance. And therefore, there is that kind of connection we still need to have. I'm sure, let's look at movies, for instance. If you watch the movie Gladiator, in Gladiator, the main lead, I don't know the name of him as a character, but Russell Crowe, for instance, he actually worships his ancestors. There are small kind of toy-like things he has, and he actually worships them. Now, if you read books like, for instance, Ikigai, in that it's mentioned Japanese actually worship their ancestors even now. Chinese do that, for instance, during the month of, I think, September or so, when we also do the same in India. The Chinese also have the same tradition of respecting the ancestors. Exactly the same thing. It's the same month. I guess it must be the same kind of tradition. Or you look at the movie Coco, where you have the Mexican story theme, in which the boy is actually kind of going back in time, or he goes to the other world, and he tries to kind of ensure that the grandfathers or great grandfather is not forgotten, because once he is forgotten, he moves away or he kind of disappears. So that's the tradition. So what it means is that there is this continuity or the understanding that Pitrus or the ancestors actually take care of us as much as we need to take care of them. And these are universal traditions. And we need to kind of understand from this context what we're going to talk about here. Now, what happened, what happened was that when the religious monopolization has happened in the name of monotheism, what monotheism brought into equation was that polytheism went out of the window. And when polytheism goes away, your deities and gods and such kind, including the Pitru Devas, uh, they all go out of the window. None of them are to be worshipped anymore. Now, if that's the case, you can see how the modern kind of societies which are devoid of the ancient practices that they used to hold on to in the past, right? They don't exist anymore. Those practices don't exist anymore, and it's out of their mind, and it is therefore very hard for them to relate to as if it never existed in their lands ever before. And if that's the case, then what is left is obviously a place like India, where it is still practiced. There's the continuity of Sanatana Dharma with uninterrupted practice. And therefore, it is assumed by the rest of the world that Sanatana Dharma, or let's translate it. What does it translate to? It translates to eternal principles, eternal cosmic principles. Now, if that is the case, it is therefore psychologically kind of assumed that it is confined to only one geographical piece of land in this entire world, when in actual fact it existed in every part of the world in the past, in perhaps different expressions, but the basic framework was the same. But now what we have is that we have a situation where it assumes a form which is seen to be suspect, with a little bit of suspicion that it comes from a land alien to them, and therefore they're not, none of the others are easily kind of going to accept this form of spirituality, which they actually in all fact, in actual fact, they have held on to many generations ago. So what I've written here is that when, due to religious monopolization in the name of monotheism, the remaining regions lose the essence of universal spirituality, it appears that such universal eternal spirituality is not theirs at all, right? It's completely vanished out of the memory. And this alienation without a trace anymore made the rest of the world disown what was once a common global spiritual path, including theirs as well. And when over a period of time it was practiced only in one region, that land such as India, it becomes apparently it becomes the sole representative. But fortunately for us, I mean, we have had the continuity in terms of our uninterrupted adherence to Sanatana Dharma. Now imagine a scary situation where, if even this piece of land did not have this adherence, or it stops existing, then theoretically you can say that it would be wiped out of the face of the earth, and it's therefore unlikely that universal spirituality or Sanatana Dharma or eternal principles are going to make a return ever. But let me remind you, that is a theoretical possibility. Practically, Sanatana Dharma can never be extinguished. But having said that, the various practices, and it's like the science of spirituality. So various means and methods through which easy access, easy understanding of divinity, the various paths. Let's say, for instance, the traditions of Karma Yoga, the Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. all have to be reinvented again, and it's going to take a lot of time before they are reinvented. Okay, I'm hoping that I'm making sense, and people are able to follow. I'll just take a pause here just to see if I'm able to connect to people on this topic. If anybody wishes to say anything. Anyone has anything to say? So shall I proceed? Okay, so and what can Sanatana Dharma offer to the world? As I said earlier, it's a framework which guides us in the path of cosmic truth, and it offers the scientific temperament. It gives us the flexibility to think. It gives us the ability to question, and it's a framework of spiritually aligned structure to our lives to live responsibly. So, apart from a spiritual framework, it is actually also a guide for our materialistic existence. Let me put it that way. So, it is a guide for materialistic existence. And how do we know that? We know that because the application goes into the ashrama dharma, varna dharma, and such. So there are various ways it is then structured into how we can make use of Sanatana Dharma, the framework of it, in materialistic existence. And the best way to explain is Purusharthas. Dharma, Artha, and Kama are to be practiced in keeping in mind moksha as the goal. Okay, so moksha is not going to be missed out at all. That's the spiritual goal. But look beautifully how we are going to kind of incorporate the moksha as the background. It's like it works on the subconscious level, just assume. And at the conscious level, we're actually kind of doing things on a materialistic front, making sure that we are not, getting out of track from the spiritual goal. And the choice to move in or out of the concept, which is like move in or out of understanding and practicing Sanatana Dharma, you don't need to ask anybody's permission, or you're not answerable really to anybody. And it actually gives the framework to understand your role and responsibility towards yourself. Okay, so frankly speaking, Sanatana Dharma is all about yourself. What are you? Who are you? And how are you going to learn about yourself? So the jnanam vijnanam. So the jnanam is that you are the Purusha, you are the Atman, and you are in need of knowing, discovering that. But you are actually kind of distracted with the Maya Prapancha here. So that's the jnana, but the application is the vijnana. So it's all about yourself. But then if it is only about yourself, we have a problem, because it leads to kind of very self-centered approach. You don't care at all about your family. So you have the grihastha dharmas, for instance, and then once you are a grihastha, you actually are responsible for your family. So as 99% of us enter into grihastha phase, it is to be very well understood that Sanatana Dharma can give you an excellent kind of rule book or a guide to how to lead a life of a responsible life within the family, making family as your priority, but still not neglecting yourself. So therefore, I call it you, you, family, and Sanatana Dharma. And similarly, then you have you, society, and Sanatana Dharma. So you're still valuing yourself, and yet you are contributing to society and applying the rules of Sanatana Dharma here, or the learnings of Sanatana Dharma. And how do we know that? Again, we can use the Grihastha Dharma formula here. And for instance, it says, Yata mataram ashritya jivanti jantavaha, tata grihastham ashritya jivanti manavaha, is how it is put. So Grihastha's role doesn't finish by just looking after his family. That again leads to self-centeredness, but it extends to contributing to society. So therefore, one of the topics I've been thinking about doing is societal responsibility of a Hindu, and that would be a topic we need to really look at. Similarly, we need to look at topics, for instance, premarital counseling through Sanatana Dharma or Grihastha Dharma. And why is it important? We have to find ways to kind of help educate those entering into wedlock, because a lot of them are just marrying without having absolutely no understanding of um, how we need to kind of use the Sanatan Dharma formula in terms of building our own families. Okay, or marital conflicts and leading to divorces is becoming very common and prevalent even in India because of the same problem. And then you have Sanatana Dharma gives you the framework for you to work on yourself, environment, and Sanatana Dharma, right? We can talk about these are all various topics, or each one can be an individual topic on its own, but we need to talk about it when the time comes. It gives you the framework to understand your occupational preferences or life choices as per your guna, karma based varna. And where do we know this? Again, we go back to Bhagavad Gita. Chaturvarnyam maya srishtam gunakarma vibhagashaha, says Krishna. So we know that. And it is not to be confused with the social application of the same Varna system to be called as Jati system. Now, Jati system is as I said, it's a social application of Varna system. We can again talk about it as a separate topic. And what can Sanatana Dharma offer to the world? Look, it recognizes and empowers your role in society aligned to dharmic living. Now, whether it's a Kshatriya or a Vaishya or a Shudra or a Brahmana. So, if I put them in English, it comes to leadership, workmanship, pursuit of knowledge, or investment. It teaches you the tolerance, which is kshama, love, loyalty to your chosen path, that is the swadharma, equanimity, samadrishti, performing duties with no expectations, nishkama karma, balance of emotions, sthita prajnata. It teaches you all those universal spiritual values. Again, you can use them, for your to lead your own materialistic life in an excellent fashion. It gives you the scope to understand the relation between human and gods. I like the way Sai Deepak, in his preface in his book, India That is Bharat, he deliberately, I'm sure, has mentioned dedicated to the gods. Why did he use plural there and not God? Because he understands that God refers to monotheistic traditions. Gods refers to the polytheistic tradition. For us, it is gods as in deities, but for us, it is the Paramatma who is the all encompassing universal cosmic truth. So there's a difference there, but we need to still appreciate that we respect and worship deities, and that's been practiced all across the world, and it's still practiced. So that both have a symbiotic role to work towards sustenance or nurturing of the living planet and perhaps the creation. And how do we know that? We know it again through Bhagavad Gita, where it says, where was that? Devan bhavayatanena te deva bhavayantu vaha parasparam bhavayantaha shreyah paramavapsita. We need to kind of take care of the gods just as the gods take care of us. And if we do so, parasparam bhavayantaha, when we do that on a symbiotic basis, we actually lead to sustenance of this planet for our own benefit and for the benefit of the entire creation. Okay. Okay, so how do we make Sanatana Dharma global? I think based on what I have already explained, I hope I have made a case to say that Sanatana Dharma has truly been universal, and it's not necessarily confined to a local regional expression of it. The basic framework existed everywhere. So we just need to remind all humanity that this is how everyone lived and practiced in all parts of the world, time immemorial. That irrespective of the religion or ideology one may belong to right now, we're all born into Sanatana Dharma as spiritual beings in human body. It is the mind and circumstances which take them or us away from it in different directions. And we need to explain that the way forward in the modern world is through Sanatana Dharma, as explained above, because it gives this, from a societal perspective, it gives us the flexibility and the freedom. From a scientific perspective, it gives us a scientific temperament to question, explore. And it still gives us the spiritual guide, and it still gives us the societal guide or a materialistic guide. I mean, I can't think of any other framework which actually incorporates everything. And how do we, yeah, so, and what else do we kind of spread? What are the messages that we are going to kind of spread? The societal freedom and yet the social responsibility. Yeah, we mentioned just now. The individual freedom to choose a path of personal development, the scientific compatibility with spiritual growth, and living within an environment and leading a life of balance in utilizing resources such as food, material, and fuel in moderation. And that's the key. We have to use them, and we are going to use them in moderation. And there should be that respectful kind of tradition. And exactly, again, this is where we come to the whole point, Devan Bhavayatanena. See, the resources are given to us by the gods. And if the next shloka says that if we who are abusing these resources, but not really kind of making any efforts to kind of thank the gods or the deities, we are equated to um, thieves. Okay. I can't remember the next shloka, which would be never mind. Anyway, so that's what it is. So we have to understand that this is very much a fundamental requirement for us to live within environment. We can't just keep abusing resources and as if they belong to us. No, they belong to everything. It's not everybody, it's everything. And we are to use them in moderation as much is required, and we may have to make all the efforts to replenish it. Okay, so we have a comment here in the chat box. So Sanatana Dharma is polymorphy, monotheism. There are many forms with Shakti and Purusha and one God. What are your thoughts? Okay, so we'll come to that later. Yeah. So whose responsibility is it to make it global? Look, Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam both have clearly given the guidance on the need to teach the eternal spiritual principles to all of humanity. And again, where do we know, or how do we know that? Ya imam paramam guhyam adbhakte shabidasyati bhaktim mai param kritva mame vaishyat asamshayaha, says Krishna in 18th chapter. Those who actually take this knowledge to, and literal translation is establish within the hearts of my devotees, such person will reach me, and that will not be that will not be questionable. So that's the literal translation basically. So it basically says that you are kind of allowed to spread the word of divinity and make sure that all the devotees, all those who are eligible to receive the knowledge, are provided the knowledge. So exactly what it means is knowledge has to be kind of spread. It's not a great idea to just keep it to yourself and say that, well, I'm modest and I'm not going to do anything about it. It is all those, and who is responsible to make it global? It is all those who actually understand and practice Sanatana Dharma that are expected to declare the cosmic knowledge to the world. How do we assess ourselves that we are actually practicing Sanatana Dharma correctly? Now, that's a question we need to answer ourselves. We can talk about it later on. What preparation is required and who can teach? How much knowledge is enough to start practicing Sanatana Dharma? Now, if you look at it, it is an ocean. It is an ocean, and how much is enough if that is the case? And I think it is not at all a difficult question, or the answer is quite simple. You only need the essence of Sanatana Dharma, the basic framework, and you are through. You actually don't need more than that. In fact, if you understand Bhagavad Gita very carefully, if you actually start practicing the whole idea of love, samadrishti, that is it. You really don't need anything more than that in practice of Sanatana Dharma. And where does he say that? He actually says it in, I think it's the third or the fourth chapter, or perhaps even the second. I can't, no, not this, definitely not the second. I think it's the third or the fourth chapter. This shloka would be in the lines of Yomam pashyati sarvatra. Yes, Yomam pashyati sarvatra, sarvanchamai pashyati. Tasyaham na pranashyami, sachamena pranashyati. The one who sees me in everything and sees everything in me, he will never be lost for me and he will never lose me. When does somebody see everything in him and everything, him in everything? That includes him as well. When there is the samadrishti, when it is understood that everything has the same Atman in it, and then the love starts coming through and you actually love everything that you see around. If you practice that alone, you are actually already practicing Sanatana Dharma. So therefore the question is, do you really have to read the books? Answer is yes and no. When I say no, you don't need to. But yes is when you actually are in that path and you are actually kind of wanting to learn more or better ways to kind of help yourself. Surely Swadhyaya is going to be helpful. There's no doubt about it. But how much knowledge is enough to start practicing Sanatana Dharma? Not much. But what is important is, again, the concept of Jnanam and Vijnanam. You have to practice what you understand. There is absolutely no scope for somebody to be saying Sanatana Dharma practitioners if they are not valuing the universal principles and if they are not practicing them. Then whose responsibility is it to make it global? Again, teaching kids Sanatana Dharma through bhakti and logical reasoning. I think that's what is required in the modern world. We need to be able to kind of have that aptitude to engage the audience or even children at home, wherever it may be, through logical reasoning. And they may have a lot of questions. See, in the olden days, Kshatriya was bestowed the responsibility of protecting land, knowledge, dharma, and its propagation. And who is the modern day Kshatriya then? Do we have one? And in what form is he or she? So these are all going to be important questions to look at whose responsibility it is. Now, I'm throwing in some genuine questions across the world nowadays. People are asking, for instance, do you have to do puja or believe in a god or follow a daily ritual to practice Sanatana Dharma? Now, I think we need to be capable of finding, being able to give answers to genuine questions. And do you have to be a vegetarian to practice Sanatana Dharma? What does Sanatana Dharma say about same-sex marriage? Even the Supreme Court is, I think, debating now about same-sex marriage in India, you know, and lawyers are actually kind of putting forward their opinions on what has been the what have been the principles of Institute of Marriage in India throughout, and therefore there's a discussion going on there. And what if I have sinned? Will I be forgiven? And can I be saved from eternal hell? Now, do we have questions? Are we preparing well for these questions to be answered? That's the job of those who are going to kind of really wanting to take Sanatana Dharma global. See, the funny thing is that, again, we don't need a lot of understanding. We need to learn to keep things simple. If you really look at Nirvana Shatakam, if you look at Nirvana Shatakam carefully, Chidananda Rupa Shivoham, everything that he says, Manobuddhi Ahankara Chittani Naham. I'm none of these. I'm just the kind of the universal consciousness. If that is what Sanatana Dharma is, Naveda Yajna, yeah, I think so. So he says things like, for instance, I'm not the Yajna, I'm not the Veda, and I'm actually beyond that. It's not about, it's not important. I'm beyond all these things. When am I beyond all these things? So to answer a lot of those questions that we had earlier, we need to learn to keep things simple. Now, we don't have a dictatorial kind of a format where these things are to be done and not to be done. Now, those come in the mata, the traditions. So the traditions come later. Traditions actually would have a lot of things to do and not to do and so on. But when you go actually to the basic framework of Sanatana Dharma, it is nothing beyond you and your core self. That's it. So if that is the case, honestly, do we need to be kind of restricted or tied down to any of the requirements? That we need to kind of understand it ourselves. I personally would think that no, we don't need to be kind of limited by restrictions and rules. When you truly want to practice Sanatana Dharma, you are liberated, or you are liberal. You are actually free to kind of be your own self and practice it the way universal consciousness allows you to do so. So the answer to all these questions is Sanatana Dharma is about who you are at your inner core self, that you are the best person to help discover yourself. Again, where do we know that from? Uddharet atmanatmanam natmanam avasadayet. Atmaiva atmano bandhuhu atmaiva ripruhu atmanaha. Again, from Bhagavad Gita. You are your own enemy, you are your own friend. When are you your enemy? If you don't care for yourself. When are you your friend? When you actually pay attention to yourself and do everything that is necessary to put yourself in the right path. And therefore, you're not answerable to anyone but yourself. Okay. And the questions to ask are you really honest to yourself? I mean, I'm not talking about the audience here, but what I'm saying is, when we are asked questions about practices and fine print or tricky questions, we need to really look at the answers have to really ultimately come from the place of, look, you are going to help yourself through this framework of Sanatana Dharma. And how are you going to do it? First, figure out whether you are actually honest to yourself, or are you mimicking somebody, or you pretending to be somebody. Are you actually kind of trying to fit into the society, societal norms and so on? You need to really look at it. And are you being natural? Are you giving yourself the much needed chance to align your life to the true self of yours, beyond all the layers of assigning a name, feelings, beliefs, and approvals? This is where a lot of answers can actually come to very tricky questions. So that's the reason why I put this slide. I mean, it's not the only answer to be given, but this possibly should be the starting point to kind of have that dialogue. Okay, so that's where I complete my presentation. In case it was a whiz through. I'll just pause here anyway. I mean, finish the presentation. We can have time for discussion if anybody wishes to say anything or ask any questions. So regarding the question or the point in the chat box about Sanatana Dharma is polymorphic bimonotheism. Sir, can you explain what that means? Polymorphic bimonotheism? Sonia ji.
Yes. Namaste.
Namaste.
I heard it a while back, and it kind of made sense. Polymorphic is different avatars of God. We have so many different avatars of in Hinduism, and Bai is the dual form, Shakti and Purusha, and monotheism is finally there is one God. So we're not just as simple as monotheistic or polytheistic, or we're not as simple as that. The if you want to explain it in a term that kind of makes sense, that was what was provided, and I thought that is at least a little bit closer to how most of us accept the different gods, respect the different gods, because we understand that they're polymorphic.
Yeah, I mean that's a nice actually a way to put it. So yeah, it's a nice way to put it, isn't it? I mean, there are lots of multiple, I would say hundreds or thousands. I mean, personally speaking, there could be thousands of gods. It doesn't really matter. And so what you're then referring to is the Prakriti and Purusha concept, which is also part of the Sankhya Yoga. And so Pradhana and the Purusha. If you look at Sankhya Yoga, both are seen to be eternal. So that makes sense there. And if you look at other, then the whole understanding of the universal Paramatman as such, their things can differ, as in, for instance, depending on Advaita or Visishta Advaita and so on. But ultimately, Paramatma would be the monotheistic kind of idea, or we agree there, I guess. Let us say, for instance, we agree with the modern religions at that place, but there is a huge difference between what is proposed by us and what is proposed within the modern religions, which is that we believe that the Paramatman actually pervades everything, and nothing is left out. So there are definitely those differences. I think where obviously we have lost a lot of our understanding, particularly even back home in India, is we seem to be in two camps now. One, either ritualistically worshipping gods as such, the deities, various deities, and not actually understanding the concept of the universal kind of consciousness, or the nirvikara, nirakara rupa. On the other hand, we have the huge vacuum of understanding of saying gods are not to be worshipped, and it is idol worship, and therefore it doesn't make sense. Worshipping trees and all is superstitious. So there the understanding is lacking, in the sense that people seem to be moving away from the idea of me living with the nature, me living in line with the
Would you mind muting that person?
Sorry.
Would you mind muting that person? There's a person who's unmuted, unless they are wanting to talk. Okay, thank you.
Sure. So we have a lot of problems there in the whole understanding. I think that is why what at least I have been trying to do was that I was trying to kind of bring in the framework of where do we start? What will be the starting point? Where do we all need to agree upon? For instance, in this same group, we have my friend Seshagiri, who has done Visishtha Advaita course previously through Soham Vidya. Now, obviously, Visishtha Advaita has a different approach to Advaita, and similarly, there's a different approach from Dvaita. And similarly, they may be, as you rightly said, there's a Shakta, and then the various definitions, all the matas and so on. Or they may all not agree necessarily with somebody who just says that I'm not interested in any form of manifested worship. I'm only interested in Nirakara Rupa worship. So where do we all actually meet? I think we have a meeting point. The meeting point is the very basic framework of understanding that what are the core features of Sanatana Dharma, which is the Atman, Paramatma, Punarjanma, Karma Siddhanta, and Moksha as the goal. There, nobody actually debates. All these are agreed upon. Nobody actually debates these things. So that's the starting point. And thereafter, we need to kind of allow the option for people to choose their own different paths, and but not to forget the basic framework. If we do that, we actually have made a lot of progress. Otherwise, what's happening is everybody is building castles in the air, but they don't have a foundation underneath that. And that's a very dangerous situation to be in. And that's not Sanatana Dharma. Frankly speaking, Sanatana Dharma is only valid when the foundation is there. If the foundation is missing, but the castles are being built in the air, that's not Sanatana Dharma. That is just, I would call it religion, but definitely not Sanatana Dharma.